The sad thing is when we really can't come up with a good prognosis. The patients usually be the second or third visit to the office, and they'll generally take me aside. They don't want to ask this question in front of the family, trying to protect the family. And they'll say, "Doc, tell me the truth. How much longer do you really think I have? How much longer do you really think I have?"
My daughter Melissa knows what cancer is, and she knows that people can die from cancer, and every day she would ask me if I was going to die, and if I died, who was going to take care of her and her sister.
My children, I had to take care of my children no matter what. I was like, their needs still have to be met, whether I'm on my last leg or not. You know, they still need to be fed, they still need to be bathed, they still need to be nurtured. Life doesn't stop just because I'm sick.
I see a lot of cancer patients. I've been doing this now for 25, 28 years. The worst cancer that comes in my office is the lung cancer, because lung cancer patients generally do not do well.
Lung cancer is not being able to breathe, being on oxygen 24/7 as high as it'll go, just so you can breathe. It feels like someone's sitting on your chest and you can't get them off. It feels like you're slowly strangling.
That's one operation. That was a shocker, waking up with tubes down your throat and you can't breathe and you're gagging, and I wouldn't wish that on nobody. And you're like wondering, I just felt like I was gonna die right there. I was going to choke to death, and
get your foot jigging out, woman. I'm talking about baby, I'm going back home again with you. I wish I was back.
I've never smoked in my life, ever. I thought I had a cold, and he says, "Well, let's get an X-ray and make sure it's not pneumonia." And when he got it back, it was this huge, like a blimp on the screen, and I immediately thought of radon. First of all, to have my house tested, and once I had it tested, the results were high.
I believe radon caused my lung cancer. I was not a smoker. My husband was not a smoker. My house tested at 50 for radon gas, and my neighbor's house tested at 70 for radon gas, to a very high level. He died December of 2002, shortly before I was diagnosed.
The very first moment that I learned the tumor in my left lower lobe was cancerous was I was still in recovery after surgery. I was not able to open my eyes or move, and the doctor just placed his arm on my shoulder and said it was cancer. You can't explain what that feels like to hear those words. After the doctor told me that it was cancer, my first thought was towards my husband and what we're going to have to be going through in the next upcoming months and years. And I was questioning how I got lung cancer.
Never have smoked, not secondhand smoke, no family history of it, not asbestos. Tested our home. Thankfully my dad remembers hearing about radon from like the 60s and 70s, did a little bit of investigating, purchased kits for us, tested our home, came in at 8.6 measurement. And from there, met Tom. And he came in and we mitigated our home, brought it down less than 1. And since then, I've gone through chemotherapy. Like I've mentioned today, it's my new hairstyle. And it's coming in and I'm noticing more gray. That I don't like.
Good morning. My name is Lane Price, Dr. Price. I'm honored to be here. I'm a retired radiation oncologist, a cancer doctor, who lived and worked for many, many years in Decatur, Alabama. That's up in North Alabama, a very high level 1 radon area. And this morning, what I want to talk about is about the past, what all has been accomplished, the present, and then looking forward to the future. Now, you're going to have a lot of talks during this conference that are going to have PowerPoints and slides and graphs and exponential equations. We're going to talk about half-lives and mitigation strategies. You're going to hear a lot of high-tech information, but you're not going to hear it right now. What you're going to be hearing, aside from this drawl, it's South Georgia is where it came from, you're going to be hearing about people who are going to, their faces are going to be on the screens. These are people who contracted and, for the most part, died from radon exposure. We're not going to have any PowerPoints except for these ongoing screen photo album of people who were affected by this odorless, colorless, tasteless, sinister radioactive gas. There are going to be pictures, that printouts of all these pictures. There are a whole lot of them. I mean, a whole lot of them. And they'll be down in the exhibit area. I'd urge you, pick up one of these. Pick up one. I mean, here's one, a lady from Huntsville, Alabama, never smoker, 11.7 picocuries per liter of radon. You've got people from Pennsylvania. Here's a girl that was a marathon runner, I understand, from Oregon, somebody from Minnesota. Pick up one of these pictures and then sometime Google them. And that can be your own radon reason. It's very interesting and sad. This is a sneaky element, and I say sneaky. Let's just pretend. Remember back in high school chemistry when you'd mix this and that and get hydrogen sulfide just because it was really fun to make that stuff? And you remember how the English teacher somewhere far away would come running down there and say, "Why are y'all making that smelly gas?" Or if a skunk came in the room, my goodness, we'd all be out of here. But what are we doing? We're just sitting here breathing like people do. But if we were in a level 1, a high-level radon area, we'd be just sitting here breathing, but we would be breathing this sneaky, quiet little gas that's just sort of lurking around. Now, go back in your mind till October of 2003. I think a lot of y'all were gathered at the time in Nashville, Tennessee for the ARST conference. I had only recently become involved with radon at the time, and I was invited to make the keynote address. Well, like a bad penny, here I am again, 13 years later, and again, and still involved with radon. In the summer of well, let me tell you a story. How in the world did I get involved with radon? Well, in the summer of 2002, I was at work at the Oncology Center and had just finished signing 4 death certificates of patients who had become friends who had died of lung cancer. 2 of them had been smokers, but 2 had never smoked, hadn't even had secondhand smoke. They had none of the expected risk factors, but they developed lung cancer, bronchoalveolar lung cancer, which is a fairly rare type. And they had died and I was signing their death certificates. I wondered why. Could it be that they'd lived all their lives in that level 1 North Alabama high radon area? Could that have led to their cancers? Now, at the same time, I knew of an ongoing discussion that was going on at our local city council. There had been an amendment proposed to change the building code to include radon-resistant construction techniques. Now, this amendment had been brought up and tabled time and time again for about 6 months. And I noticed that day in our local newspaper, the Decatur Daily, that this radon amendment was going to be brought up again at the council meeting that night. So I decided to attend. I was concerned about those patients who had died, the ones I had just signed off on the death certificates, and about others that could meet the same fate. I was concerned about radon. I remember that night quite well. When the time came for discussion, I raised my hand and made what was probably a pretty impassioned plea that we, there in Decatur, Alabama, do something definitive to protect our citizens. An investigative reporter for the Decatur Daily, Eric Fleischauer, happened to be at the meeting, and he picked up on my plea and wrote the first of 16 articles educating his readers about radon and what it could do. I guess I was pretty impassioned that night because the council passed the ordinance that night, and Morgan County, where I was, became the first county in Alabama to adopt radon-resistant construction requirements. Now, other counties followed suit. Other counties in that high radon area joined in, and my local fight for radon awareness was on. Now, somehow this news story got picked up by the AP, and it made it up to New Hampshire, to a little bitty town where Peter Hendrick lives, and he saw it. And all of a sudden, I was a radon ranger. I gave talks to everybody. I talked to clubs and churches and medical groups, to the state legislators. I even had the opportunity to go to Washington, D.C. to meet with Alabama Senator Richard Shelby, who at that time was chair of the Senate Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee, HUD. And it was there in Washington that I met two true radon warriors, Liz Hoffman and Sue Michaels. Their pictures will be coming up, and you'll see and hear about them. These two ladies, Liz was from Wisconsin. She was diagnosed with lung cancer at age 37, and Sue was from Pennsylvania. Neither of them had ever smoked, never ever. And they hadn't had secondhand smoke exposure. But they had unknowingly lived for years and years in homes that were found to have high radon levels, found to have these high levels after Liz and Sue were diagnosed with advanced bronchoalveolar lung cancers. They're both dead now. Liz died after 10 years of a very valiant fight and medical expenses of about $1 million. And Sue, before she ever got to meet any of her grandchildren. But their lives mattered so very much. Liz went to D.C. several times. There's one picture, a little flash by, showing her sitting on the Capitol steps, a turban on her head because her hair was long gone to the chemo. She was waiting then to testify before some more legislators. Liz and Sue founded CANSAR, capital C, little a-n, then capital letters S, capital A, capital R. CANSAR, Cancer Survivors Against Radon. CANSAR has a booth here today. And all these pictures that you keep seeing up there on the screen, they'll be sitting down there by their booth. Pick up one. Let that person be your radon reason. Well, this was in 2003. And I talked then, impassioned, I'm sure, and now here I am back 13 years later. Now, just as a quick aside, in 2008, I retired. I've retired several times, but during that retirement, from oncology, I was drafted by a hospital way down in South Georgia, near Plains, Georgia, actually, in Albany, Georgia, to build an inpatient hospice facility. And while I was in Albany, actually for 8 years, I got the hospice facility built, and being concerned about the terrible state of education in that area, I ran for and was elected to the school board. And finally, I retired again. And my husband and I were trying to decide where we were going to move. And we decided to come out right on back to Decatur, Alabama. Grandchildren have a real magnetic pull, as y'all know. But we're right back in Decatur. And so I got thinking about radon. So I called Peter, the radon reference himself. I said, Peter, I'm back in North Alabama. I'm ready to get more involved with radon. What can I do? And also, what's happened while I was down in South Georgia? And I was surprised and delighted and excited to hear all that has taken place. I mean, for instance, ORST produced the first American National Standards Institute ANSI standards for multifamily radon measurement and mitigation. Liz Hoffman kept going to Washington, and her work helped to save the state indoor radon grant program. In 2012, HUD enacted a multifamily policy. Right now, they are hopefully on the verge of adopting a single-family policy. Sue Michaels never saw her grandchildren, but now they are getting grown. They're in Girl Scouts, and the Girl Scouts of America is now promoting radon information, radon education. Literally thousands of HUD FHA finance projects are being tested every year. Healthcare facilities are now being added to the batch. And HUD is now finally considering this FHA single-family radon policy. That could impact over 1 million mortgages annually. Now, it's about time something was happening. You probably remember that in 1988, it's 28 years ago, the Indoor Radon Abatement Act was passed. It was 1988. Sometimes Washington moves slowly. But we do have so far to go. Now let's just say, if you're going to buy a house, nobody wants to buy a house that's full of asbestos. And heaven knows if you buy an old house, you want to find out about lead paint and get it out of there. And every home buyer and the mortgagers require a termite letter. But whoever ever heard of a termite causing one's death? And then there's radon, scary radon. And so I'm here today, not with PowerPoints and exponential equations. All of us know how to do these things. I'm here telling you that radon is more than a gas. It is a face. This is Sue. She was a lovely lady. She died. She lived in a high radon area. She got lung cancer, and she died. So I'm here today telling you scientists that this science has a face. This science makes a difference. This science saves lives. You save lives. And hopefully together we can make the difference that will be instrumental in saving those 21,000 lives a year, those 21,000 people who die every year because of those little alpha particles that came from radon, that came from radium, that came from uranium. Because uranium over eons broke down into radium, and then 1,600 years later, half of that broke down into radon, and 3.82 days later, half of that became alpha particles. And those alpha particles got into the lungs and changed the DNA of the bronchial cells. And that person, that unsuspecting person who is just sitting there breathing, developed lung cancer. And it's up to all of us, to each of us, to teach about radon, about looking for radon existence, about getting rid of radon exposure, about saving lives, many, many lives, maybe 21,000 lives a year. And that's what the future is all about. The future is about us. Thank you very much.